Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast, presented by the onX Hunt app. This is Mike Higman, your host, and I am really thankful that you have decided to tune in today. I've got a pretty cool episode where I interviewed Chuck Echenique we talked about a lot of cool stuff. We talked about alligator hunting. We talked about getting public land permits here in Florida, how to scout and hunt on public land, and then we also finally got an update on the bear hunt here in Florida. So I actually want to give you some timelines to look at, just in case maybe one of those topics is not exactly what you want to, if you're not planning on hunting Florida, you might not want to listen to the how to get the best quota hunt or that kind of thing. So I'm doing this intro now. I don't really know exactly how long it's going to be, so I'm going to have to guess at these numbers for you. But I did some calculations. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that this intro is going to be about 8 minutes. So if you want to skip ahead about 8 minutes and don't listen to the intro, you can do that and start out with the interview there. And I would say about the 50-minute, so the first 50 minutes of the interview, we pretty much covered gator hunting. How to get the tags, what their strategies. We got some cool stories. So after that, we talked about getting public land quota hunts here in Florida and some of the strategies with that. We didn't talk about that too long. It was about 10 minutes. So about an hour in, we got into public land hunting strategies and scouting. And then finally, a little after an hour and a half, we get an update on the bear hunt here in Florida. And I'm sure there's some stuff in there for everybody, especially, once we started getting to the whitetail strategies and that kind of stuff. And I think the bear hunting update will be interesting to everybody as well. So if you want to skip ahead, it's not going to hurt my feelings. A few things I want to cover before we get into this. Number one, Father's Day week is here. onX is running a great special, 30% off. So if you've been holding out, now's a great time to get that, and it would make a great Father's Day gift. You and your pops could, look at different places to hunt together, and that could be something you do together. So I think that'd be a really cool gift. Another thing is the QDMA has a special for Father's Day as well. If you go to QDMA.com/Father's Day, you can get one for you and your dad, or you can get a membership for yourself and automatically get a kids membership as well. So those are two pretty cool options. Of course, hunting gear deals we're going to be bringing up deals on all kinds of cool Father's Day sales. Arctic's got a pretty good one with 60% off. There's all kinds of other sales. If you haven't signed up for the email list, that's definitely a great idea to do so you don't miss out on any of those. We're going to do one of the QDMA convention 5 quick questions that we've done a few of. And this one's going to be with Jeff Lindsey, so it was cool of him to do that with me. Don't forget, I did these at the QDMA convention, and the audio is not the greatest, but the whole episode's not like that. It's just a few-minute interview we did with him. So let's go and listen to that.
This is Jeff Lindsey of the Lindsey Way on the Sportsman's Channel.
All right, Jeff, describe for me your ideal or your favorite hunting spot.
My favorite hunting spot would be just a major funnel during the rut. Got food on each side, a little cover, somewhere it's kind of thick understory that I could call, rattle at bucks, grunt them in. That's my ideal situation. You were actually here at the Deer Con. You were describing an actual stand that's like one of your best stands. Why don't you tell me about that one? Yeah, that's what we call the 63. It's a 63-acre piece. It's right across from one of our neighbors. He lives there, him, his wife, his kids, his 24 dogs, his donkeys, his mules. It gets pretty noisy, but it's just proven to be one of the best rut stands, the best rut stand we've ever had or ever hunted. But you don't have to have super large tracks, and it's kind of a 2-story type little hardwood strip, about 100 yards wide. And like I said, it's thick. You can call, you can see a long ways, but yeah, you can call deer in. They come in real close, and it's an awesome spot.
All right. Do you have anything unusual in your hunting pack?
Snacks are usual, so it's mainly filled with snacks and something to read every now and then. But unusual, yeah, maybe a snake bite kit. That's probably it.
I'd say that's a little unusual. I guess that's for the Georgia area.
Yeah, Georgia or elk hunting, mule deer hunting, some of those western hunts. But it stays in there, so you never know. You never know when Iowa some poisonous snake crawls into the state and you have to deal with it. It bites you.
All right, so it's summer right now. We're starting to think about, we're thinking about hunting year round, but right now when you're dreaming about hunting this fall, what is it that you think of first?
I think of the rut. I think of a cool breeze, 35 degrees, front moving in, And, just one of those days that you think about year-round. I think about year-round, and bucks chasing does. That's what we live for.
So you didn't see these questions ahead of time, but number 4 is, what is your favorite Little Debbie snack?
Little Debbie snack, definitely the OCPs. That's what we call oatmeal cream pies. I mean, that's our go-to snack. There's always 2 or 3 of those in the pack, so it definitely wins.
That's my favorite too. Kyle always gives me a hard time because it's not the honey bun, but I was born in Wisconsin. Maybe it's a little bit northern of me, but you're born in Georgia, so I'm going to use that as my defense from now on when he calls me northern for like an oatmeal cream pies. What is one idea or tactic that has had a big impact on the way you hunt?
Probably you could say a tactic would be, Scent Crusher and Nose Jammer. People are crazy about that stuff. I mean, obviously we're sponsored by Scent Crusher, and our clothes stay in those closets and the totes and the bags. But when we get out to the field, we spray Nose Jammer, and I would never encourage someone to hunt against the wind. But in the rut with Nose Jammer, you can really get away with a lot.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. You got anywhere you want people to check you out, social media?
Yeah, you can check us out. We're all over Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, just the Lindsey way. We're easy to find. We try to keep a lot of good, cool content, keep it real, and keep it low-key.
Good stuff. Thanks, man. All right. Well, thanks to Jeff for doing that. I do want to apologize for the inconsistencies on the release dates on these. One of the things with the podcast, all the experts say you're supposed to have a regular schedule and put them on certain days so people know when to expect it. And right now in my life, that's just not going to happen. It's something I'd like to get going with the podcast, especially this fall. But what I can tell you is I'm not getting burned out on it. I have a lot of fun doing it, and I've got some really cool episodes and interviews coming up. So if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. That's the easiest way to find out about them. And I'll try to keep you updated on social media as well. You're not going to want to miss these episodes, I hope. But unfortunately, they're not going to be on a regular schedule yet. Maybe this fall that might be something I can get back into. But it's really important to me to put out some good content. And I don't take for granted the fact that y'all are taking the time to download and listen to this podcast. I really appreciate it. And just listening is enough. But if you do want to help out anymore, it would be great if you could just share it on social media. Make sure you tag me or Down South Hunting if you do that, so I can make sure to say thanks. I really appreciate it. All right, let's talk to Chuck. Okay, I'm excited to have Chuck Echenique back from Rebel Yelp Calls and Outfitters. And if you remember back, we had him on a few episodes ago to talk about the new deer hunting regulations here in Florida. And when I talked to him, I knew that he'd be a great guest to have back. He's been outfitting here in Florida for years. He used to be a moderator on the Florida Sportsman Hunting Forum, and he's real involved in the hunting community here. And he's very experienced with gator hunting and public land hunting here in Florida. So welcome back to the show, Chuck.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk a little bit about gator hunting, which is about to get started here, and then I want to get into some tactics and one right now is the time to apply for public land hunts here in Florida for quota hunts here, and but I want to get a little bit into some strategies that ought to apply to anyone across the Southeast. So first off, where are we at as far as gator hunting? As far as if you would like to go gator hunting this year, are there still opportunities to get a tag?
There's still some opportunities out there. We're into phase 2 of the 4-phase drawing system. Phase 1 is the general application period where everybody can put in for their choices. And if you get drawn, you're immediately charged for your tags, your 2 tags and license. And then if you don't get drawn, anything that's left over goes into a second drawing in phase 2, and that's where we're at right now. It's basically a one and done system. Once you get drawn, you get your license and 2 tags, and there's probably not much opportunity to draw any additional tags at that point.
Okay.
Then in phase 3, which should start in another week or so, we'll have anything that's left over you can come and grab, first come, first serve. If you don't have anything, it's kind of an open free for all. but there probably won't be much left. Right now, the only thing that's available is some county tags up in the north and a few Orange Lake tags and Kenansville tags. So those areas are pretty hard to hunt, and they're heavily pressured.
And the way the county tags work, right? The main bodies of water usually have separate tags. So you have to have a specific tag for a specific lake or river, right? And then the county is like anything else that's not listed. Is that right?
That's correct. You have, they're called AMUs, Alligator Management Units. So some lakes are their own AMU, some rivers are their own AMU, and every county is its own AMU. So if you have a county tag, you have to be certain that any body of water that you're going on is not listed as its own AMU, because those tags will not be valid. County tags won't be valid in those specific lakes or water bodies. Yeah.
And then also aren't there some like statewide tags? Is that something totally different?
No. The license is a statewide license, which means that you can hunt anywhere within the state of Florida, so long as the tags that you're hunting with are valid for the area in which you're conducting your hunt.
Okay, gotcha. And it's not like the quota hunts with big game in the fall where you can return it and that kind of stuff. Once you got the tag, you paid for it. There's no refunds, there's no returns. We had that for a short time, but it was being abused, and so we convened a technical assistance group and came up with the current system that we have right now. But at one time, you could return permits, and what was happening was guys were drawing permits and returning them, redrawing them, returning them again, and waiting for them to come into the third period, where once you already had a license, you could buy additional tags at a cheaper rate. And so that was how they gamed that system. And they were putting in large groups of hunters together to try and keep pushing those prime permits into the later phases, and then scooping up a bunch of them at once. Yeah. Somebody's always gaming the system.
Somebody's always gaming the system. There's always somebody who's out there who's figured it out and trying to cheat everybody else out of their opportunity.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and then the final option would be if somebody wants to go with an outfitter, then you don't have to have the tags ahead of time, correct?
Well, it depends on the outfitter.
Okay.
Some outfitters like myself, I only do public land hunts. So if you want to hunt with me, you either have to draw your own tags or hunt on a tag that I've drawn. And of course, I don't have any special treatment. I have to put in like everybody else. So any tags that I get are going to be through the public water system. So if you've drawn your own tags, and usually the way that I do it and several other guides do it is I work with you before the season starts to strategize what areas to apply for. If you get drawn, then we look at your dates and we get you set up for the hunt days that you're going to go. If you want to hunt with an outfitter that has private lands, those private lands are designated as private AMUs. And there, the statewide regulations don't apply as far as manner of take. Whereas, on the public water system, you have to use a hook and line. You can't use a rifle or a shotgun or a pistol. You have to use a bang stick or a knife to dispatch your gator. On private lands, you can hunt with any method that you like. That includes high-powered rifles.
Okay.
But you're going to pay a premium for private land alligator hunts.
Sure.
They're going to be 3 to 5 times more expensive than a public water hunt.
And most of those I guess I would call like trophy style hunts where you're, a lot of times those outfitters may have a specific gator they're going after. Or...
Well, yeah, most of them, the way that most of them run is you choose the size of alligator you want, and they have a fee schedule based on length.
Okay. Yeah.
So, for instance, an 8-foot alligator with a public water hunt, you're going out for the biggest gator you can get, and we charge usually a flat rate or a daily rate.
Yep.
Either by the gator or by the day. Whereas with the private water hunts, if you want an 8-foot gator, it's going to run you between $2,000 and $3,000. If you want a 9-footer, between $3,000 and $4,000, and so on.
Wow.
So yeah, it's significantly more expensive.
Mm-hmm. What is a typical night with an outfitter on public land run?
It varies from outfitter to outfitter. My rates would be, I charge by the gator instead of by the night. I used to charge by the night, but I realized that can get very expensive for a lot of guys. So I charge $9.50 a night, or per gator, I mean.
Okay.
And it could be one night, two, maybe even 3 nights, depending on the size of the gator. But the way that I look at it, we're on a public land hunt, so I'm trying to get you a good representative of the species, which means I guarantee my customers a fair opportunity at least a 7-footer. If they want something larger, I'll work with them. If they're looking for a trophy gator, then we adjust things based upon 11 foot and bigger, because a big trophy gators take a lot more energy and a lot more homework to pinpoint one and get on them. It's like anything else. If you want a trophy, it's going to take more work. It's not just something you go out there, oh, there's a 12-footer, let's go grab him and be done with it. But on a typical night, we can usually put 2, maybe 3 gators in a boat, between 7 and 10 foot. 9 to 10 footers are fairly easy to come by, depending on the areas that you draw. If you're in a good quality area that has, high population of big gators, and there's not a lot of them, and those tags they're a premium. But if you can get one, you can usually get on your gators pretty quick.
Yeah. So you really, you might plan a year or 2 in advance, because some of those, as the gator tag system's a lot. Is it the same as deer hunting, where you get preference points, or is
no?
it
There's no preference points in the alligator system,
but it might take you a couple years to get.
It could take you years and years to get them.
Yeah.
Me personally, I haven't drawn a tag in my name in first or second round since 2008.
Wow.
But I'm only applying for areas that I know have a lot of big gators.
So you personally, do you have like a list of, like, once you pull that tag, you have some people you can call and,
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got usually between, 15 to 20 hunters every year that call me and make application. And if they're successful, then we schedule their hunt. This year, of the group that I had apply, I've got 3 hunters that actually drew.
Wow.
Yeah, it's getting tougher. It's a very popular hunt. And unfortunately, the way that FWC has morphed the system into a recreational hunt, it makes it really tough for the outfitters to be able to draw tags.
Yeah. I'll tell you, when I went a couple years ago, and it was kind of an eye-opening experience to me, because I thought, okay, well, I'm going to draw the tag and then I'll kind of figure things out. And fortunately, I was able to get with a friend who does a little bit of outfitting, but mostly just really likes going on his own. But the problem with that is, I was really on. First of all, it was a lake that wasn't close to him, and actually it was Polk County, so it wasn't a lake, but the area wasn't close to him. And, so I could really only go when it was his schedule. We were only go a couple times. I didn't get a gator. But what I realized after I drew the tag is the amount of equipment and research and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of times it is best, unless it's something you're going to do like on an annual basis, it's probably a lot cheaper and more effective to go with an outfitter, unless you have somebody that already is into it.
The equipment itself, there's so much stuff that goes into it. Most people don't realize. They think, oh, I'll just, a couple fishing rods and a couple of spear points and a bang stick and I'm ready to go. But there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got hook sets, and a good hook set. I personally like the weighted treble hooks. I don't like unweighted treble hooks. I like to be able to get down below the weeds, get to the bottom quickly, and be able to drag and keep that hook on the bottom where the gators are creeping. So each hook set, I use a weighted 10-aught hook and a 14-aught hook, depending on how much muck layer there is and how far I need to cast and what the wind's like. So if I'm casting in daylight hours and I can see well and I've got relatively little cover, a 10-aught's fine, because it allows me to control that cast easier. It's not such a heavy a piece of lead that I'm throwing out there on that hook. But if it's windy, if I've got to break through lily pads, stuff like that, I want a 14-aught. It's something that's a little bit bigger, a little beefier, and heavier. And I keep usually 2 to 3 dozen hook sets with me at all times, because you will break off.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of them's got a 5/32 braided stainless steel leader, 2 foot long, with a 400-pound barrel swivel on them, crimped on, double crimped on, about 1.5 to 2 foot of leader. You know, each rig, I've got to make them. They cost about $7 to $8 a piece to make. You know, so you've got a lot of money sitting there just in hooks. Then each rod and reel combo, I use Daiwa beef sticks. They're inexpensive. I order them online. They're about $30 a piece. They're solid glass. You can pole vault with these things. You're not going to break a rod, but you will break guides, eye guides, and you'll break rod seat butts because gators are hard on equipment.
Yeah. And
then I use Penn Fierce 8000s. They're inexpensive reels, but they've got a good drag system on them, a very large arbor, and it's a good spinning reel. And I've got a half dozen of those. So for each one of those, you're talking about $100 for each rod and reel combo. 2 to 3 spears with me at all times, 10-foot spears with drivers. Another 8 or 9 spear points with braided leaders on them, lines, floats, spine chisel, hammer, tape, bang stick, ammo, first aid kit, everything you need, disinfectant. You know, if you get an alligator bite, their mouths have got a lot of bacteria in them. And chances are you're going to have to go on a course of antibiotics if you get bit by an alligator.
I'll pass.
Just because the bacteria count is so high. And believe it or not, most guys aren't getting bit by the alligator. What happens is once we got the gator dead and they're messing around and taking pictures, they don't realize how heavy that head is. And they let go of the jaw and the thing snaps closed on their hand. I've seen that happen more often than I care to admit. I've never had anybody bit by a gator, by a live gator or a captured gator, but I have had them catch their own hand in a dead gator's mouth.
Yeah. I guess it makes a good story if you don't tell the truth.
Yeah. The here's your sign story of the night. Yeah, we get plenty of those, but I always try and warn my guys, you know, this animal is not to be played with. It's a dangerous animal. Even after it's dead, it can be dangerous, just like a snake.
Well, I was actually surprised, not so much, but okay, all that gear you just went through, but on top of that, you kind of need a boat that's rigged out for gator hunting. You know, lights and you need headlamps and all that kind of stuff because otherwise you're going to get a couple hours before dark. Yeah.
Yeah, you need spotlights and headlamps and you need deck lights on the boat that don't blind you. And because gator hunting has become so popular, and these gators are very smart animals. There's a reason they've been around for millions of years, and they adapt and they have long memories. So they get skittish, especially in high pressure areas. You can't get close to them. Airboats have become difficult to hunt out of because they hear you coming from so far away. And mud boats are getting to be about the same. And believe it or not, the best tool that you can have is a very quiet trolling motor and a flats boat. But again, you're limiting yourself to where you can hunt if you're in a flats boat. But the biggest gators we always kill are out of the flats boat.
Yeah.
Because
I imagine if you're like, let's say 18, 20 years old or something like that, and you have a lot of nights over the course of a summer, you know, you probably could figure it out. If you're looking for, you know, a smaller gator or a couple of smaller gators, you could probably figure it out, you know, just by putting a lot of time in.
Yeah. It's like anything else. You know, you put your time in and you learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And eventually you get a rhythm. Like anything else, you get a rhythm. And you realize that, you know, there's certain things that you can accomplish with every gator. Colder months, as we get later into the season, the bigger gators are still trying to, you know, pack weight on and eat food before they go into hibernation. But they're not as fast and they're not as wary because the water temperatures are cooler. So they get a little sluggish. You get a break on them. You get a chance to actually get closer to them before they bolt on you.
So I know you used to be able to hunt almost for, like, you could almost get your money back for the cost of the hide. Is that game pretty much over with now?
Oh yeah, you won't even come close to getting out of your gators what you've got into the hunt.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate because, you know, the license is still a commercial license. It was developed as a commercial license and it's remained a commercial license, but the hunt has turned into a public hunt, and that's something that I've actually complained to FWC about for years now. You know, I started doing this. The first season was 1988 when they reopened alligators. I started in 1989 when I turned 18. And back then, you could actually kill 15 alligators. You could, if you had a facility where you could keep them live, you could actually keep your alligators alive until you sold them. And then it went down to 12, and then it went down to 5, and then it went down to 2 gators per license. And even back then, when it first went down to 2, nobody was hunting them. So as a guide and an outfitter and a commercial trapper, I could buy my license and get my 2 tags, and then go back in and buy as many tags as I wanted to until I was done buying tags. So it wasn't any problem to pull, 50 pairs of tags in a year for a season and fill them fairly quickly. And back then, the hide market was great. It wasn't a flooded market. But now with the egg capture and the way that they've allowed eggs to leave the state, there's an Asian market out there with a lot of different types of reptiles that are farm raised, and the farm raised market here in the United States has just made it so that wild hides are not that sought after. They're not as clean. They've got scars. There's not as much consistency on them as a farm raised gator.
Yeah, that's basically what I've heard. I mean, yes, there's a lot of hunting now, but really it's the farm raised market that really is,
Yeah, and because there's so many hides out there of decent quality, the price has gone way down on them. It used to be you could get $40 a foot for a 10-foot gator. And now you're lucky to get $12 a foot for a 10-foot gator.
All right, so let's get into why gator hunting. Give me, if you could, share a couple stories with me about why you like gator hunting and why somebody might want to consider it. Just a couple fun stories.
Well, I mean, first of all, gator hunting is unlike any other thing out there. It is very visceral. When you hook into an alligator that's 300-400 pounds with a rod, if you've ever caught a Goliath grouper or a really big billfish, the raw power that you're connected to is amazing. And it is a dangerous animal, so there's that heightened sense of danger and adrenaline rush that you're getting with it. So that's a big draw for a lot of the guys. It is exhilarating. You got a big gator on the line, and he's thrashing, and he's biting at the boat, and you got him close up, and that mouth is open and snapping. He goes into a death roll. It makes every hair on your body stand up, that's for sure. So there's that excitement level that's there, which a lot of the guys feed off of. And then there's all the other factors. There's the food factor and the fact that you can have products made out of the hide that remind you of the hunt, and you've got a nice trophy to keep for posterity.
Yeah.
But on top of that, I mean, it's really just a passion that guys have, like turkey hunting or anything else. I mean, we can get the meat at stores. You can buy turkey, you can buy farm raised venison, you can buy farm raised gator, but getting it yourself, there's always that little added factor that you can't just equate to anything else when you provide for your own harvest. And so there's every gator hunter's reason for gator hunting can be personal and should be personal. But the excitement factor, if somebody's never done it before, it's a rush. And when you realize that you've got this beast on the other end of a line that you're in hand-to-hand combat with, it's an accomplishment when you pull in, a 10-plus foot gator by yourself, just being coached by a guide or just doing it with your friends. And it is a team effort. It's hard to do by yourself as a single person. So it does take a group of guys to get it done and get it done well and safely.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've been doing this for so long. God, there's so many gator stories that I have. I remember the biggest gator I've ever killed was in excess of 13 feet. Had he been intact, and by intact I mean he was missing a portion of his nose, probably about 2 inches, and he was missing about 1.5 feet of tail. Had we been able to measure him out completely, he would have been a new state record. He would have been in excess of 14.5 feet. But we killed him in STA 1, Stormwater Treatment Area 1, down near West Palm Beach, when they were first building a transfer pool from the outer canal to one of the inner canals. and they dug about a 20-foot deep pit and put these big culverts coming in from one side to the other. And this big gator had managed to get himself down into this pit, but the walls were so steep and the water level was below the culverts that he couldn't get out. And so he was just in there engorging himself on fish and turtles that were being poured in through this pipe.
Wow.
And it had been a slow night. We'd been out probably 5 hours, hadn't seen anything, and we actually stopped the truck to relieve ourselves of the sodas and the stuff that we had been drinking all night. And I looked down to this pit, and there's this giant gator just sitting there. And I said, guys, come here, look. I had these two gentlemen from Pennsylvania with me. And I said, look at the size of this gator. And these guys actually said, we don't want anything that big. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, he's too big. I said, there's no such thing as too big in my vocabulary. I said, I realize you guys only have 2 tags, but we are killing this gator tonight. We are killing this gator. And so I took out one of those big handheld treble hooks, like the kind they use on television. It's basically a 24-aught treble hook with an anchor line on it. And I tossed it down onto this gator and snagged him by the side and tried to pull him up, and I couldn't budge him. So we got 2 lines into him, and even with 2 of us on him, and 3 guys, it was hard to start getting him lifted up. So as we're struggling with this gator, another truck full of guys comes up, and they are 3 sheets to the wind. These are local boys, and they are just plastered. Each one of them grabs a fishing rod. We've got 2 hand lines and 6 fishing rods on this gator, and we're starting to pull him up the bank. And one of the guys that was in the other truck says, I've got a long bang stick. I said, okay. It's on a telescoping pole, he says. I said, all right, great, grab it. Because this gator's 15 foot down, we can't reach him. And I figured if he's dead, we can get him up a little bit easier. Nothing else, we can get somebody down there to actually get a rope around his head and be able to pull him up with one of the trucks.
Yeah.
Well, this guy pulls out this telescoping rod that he basically made out of a pool cleaning pole.
Yeah.
And had built a 12-gauge bang stick out of conduit, which is just a bad idea all the way around. And I watched him load a 12-gauge shell into this thing, buckshot, and I told my guys, I said, you know what? Tie your ropes off to the bumper and get behind the truck because that thing's going to explode on him. And I said, let us get out of your way before you bang stick that thing. And this guy proceeds to bang stick him from above and immediately starts yelling and screaming because the bang stick head blew apart and he got shrapnel in his face. It was not pretty. He almost lost an eye.
Wow.
But we killed the gator. We got him up. 6 of us could not load him into the back of the truck. We had to drive the truck down to the side of the levee and slide him in, drop the tailgate and slide him in. But when I sat across his back, I barely got my legs around him. And when we weighed him, he was over 1,000 pounds.
Wow.
I mean, it was an enormous gator. And actually, those guys from Pennsylvania did not want him. So I let those guys that helped us tag him and keep him. We got a few pictures with him, and then we moved on, and they ended up wanting, 8, 9 footers. I'm like, I wish you guys had told me that last night. We'd have been done in 20 minutes. But, that happens. You got to know what you're looking for and what you're willing to get. But, I mean, these guys were literally frightened to death of this thing when they saw it, and they were 20 feet away from it. You know. If
you still have one of those pictures, you got to send that to me. I got to use that as the episode.
I'll see if I can find it. I've got one of one that was almost as big. That one is actually on an old hard drive that I have that I can't get into. Unfortunately,
that's the beauty of these digital pictures, right? You take them.
Yeah. Well, the hard drive took a dump on me, and I've still got it, but I can't access it.
Yeah. Yep.
It's going to cost me about $1,000 to have them build me a new hard drive and take the disk out of that one and put it into this new hard drive and get it right.
I've done that. And then the one we replaced went bad, and it was kind of like, all right, I guess we don't need this stuff that bad.
So now I do everything in triplicate backup.
Yeah.
Plus the cloud helps a lot these days.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a cheap date fixing those things. But you can't replace some of the stuff that's on them. So
no, you can't, unfortunately. And That's the price we pay.
That's crazy to me. So a gator that big, like nobody knew about it ahead of time, you know? I feel like nowadays, you know, there might be 10 guys that know about it.
Well, you know, this was that particular canal in that area borders the Loxahatchee Refuge.
Mm-hmm.
And that portion of the refuge is wet but wooded. There's a lot of willows. So it's really inaccessible. It's part of the area you can't get airboats into. There's no tracked vehicles or anything. So there's a lot of critters in there that people will never see because they just can't get to them. And those animals can move in and out of there easily.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, it's one of those things. He was there and nobody had seen him. And it was the opening week of the gator season. So it wasn't like anybody really had a chance to. I don't think that gator had been in there for very long, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
He'd probably been in there a day or two. But he was heavy. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I sat down on his back and spread my legs over across him, and I could barely squat to sit down. He was that big.
But when you found him, you knew you were getting him because he wasn't going anywhere.
He wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Since then, I have devised a block and tackle system so that if we have just a couple of guys, I can get him up using a truck. I actually screw one of those big long spikes, those curly spikes that you can put in the ground like an anchor tie down.
Yep.
And I've got a turnbuckle on it, and I've got a receiver hitch base that I can put a hand winch on, and whatever I hook into them, I could just use a clevis and attach to the hook set and be able to winch it right up using the truck. And that way I'm not pulling against the dirt. I've actually got an anchor point that will pull it straight up.
Yeah.
But I've had that pull out of the ground a few times. So I've had to go to longer anchors.
Yeah.
Okay. There's some gators down there.
Let's do one more. Let's do one more gator story before we get into some public land tactics for deer. Maybe unless you have another one in mind, I'm sure you talked earlier about some of those wily gators that have been around forever and tough to get. I'm sure there's some gators that you've spent nights and nights and nights after. You got anything like that?
Yeah, actually, Kissimmee River a few years ago, we were scouting week before the season opened, and we'd come through this little S curve in one of the oxbows, and this huge gator comes blowing out of the reeds and practically knocked us out of the airboat. And so I marked out on the GPS. I'm like, I knew this gator was going to be there. It was just a matter of trying to get on him. And we came back, set up on this gator, and had to wait him out. And it was one of those things where we were trying to get him to, come out. We couldn't just coax him out. We had to use bait. And it took us 3 nights to get this alligator to finally get close enough to a bait that we could get, try and get a rod on him, get a point on him, some kind. And we hooked up with him, and he broke us off immediately. So we went back the next week and we did it again. And this time, I devised a new spear point for a crossbow that I'd put on the machine lathe and made it light enough that we could actually shoot more than 10 yards. And we're able to get the point in him. And he broke all kinds of stuff. He actually pulled my guy on the water. The guy made the mistake of wrapping the rope around his hand and jerked him out of the boat. So I told him, just let go of the rope. There's a float on it. It's okay. We'll end up getting him. But it was a 6-hour hunt. Once we actually got a point in him, it took us 6 hours to get him into the boat. And he wasn't enormous. He was just really strong and really wide. And it was one of those things that it took us 2 weeks to get this one alligator.
Wow.
Playing cat and mouse with him. And they can, even the smaller ones can be that tough, especially in high pressure areas. They're very smart animals.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same as like turkey. Like maybe smart isn't the right word, but they're.
Yeah, I wouldn't call turkey smart. They're adapted to their habitat and their surroundings, and they've just got natural instinct. But turkeys don't know what they're doing from one second to the next. But alligators do have a long memory, and they are very, very intelligent animals. Really? Yes, they are extremely intelligent animals. Even for something that doesn't have that big of a brain, they know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I mean, they really are a perfect eating and killing machine.
Okay, so maybe give me like I'm sure there's a couple like hardcore gator hunters out there. Give me like a couple like more advanced tips, like, and I don't even know what to ask you because I'm not an advanced gator hunter, but maybe you just mentioned using bait. Like, is there a certain bait that you find that works better, something like that? You don't have to give me all your secrets, but
Oh
just
yeah,
give me
no.
some tidbits.
Look, I have no problem telling guys how to kill alligators. If I never kill another alligator again, it won't hurt my feelings. I've killed thousands of them, and to be frankly honest with you, I'm starting to do less and less of it just because it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
it really is a lot of work, and I'm getting to the point in my life where it's hard staying up all night and beating yourself up for 2.5 months.
Yeah,
chasing alligators around.
Yeah,
but my favorite bait is using either pork or beef lung because it floats. It's spongy and it floats and it rots pretty easy. So I go over to a local butcher. I usually buy 10, 15 beef lungs or pork lungs at the beginning of the season, and I set them in black plastic bags and put them out in that heat for half a day, and they get real ripe and real nasty. And I like to cut mine up into about softball-sized pieces. And you have to, in Florida, you have to use a wooden plug. You can't use a hook in your bait sets. So I rig mine up to where I put a hole through it and slide my leader down to the plug onto the clump of lung. And then I lash that to it using twine. I use a cotton twine, which will keep it on there when you're casting. It won't rip off. And it floats out there. And I keep the blood as much as I can in jugs, and I'll pour some of that out on the water because that smell carries a long ways, and those gators can smell it, and they will be attracted to it. One of the other things I like to do when I'm throwing baits is I get on my wood lathe and I make some giant cedar pencil poppers.
Okay.
That I can cast with a rod and splash, just like you would a topwater lure for bass or something. But I make a really big, it's probably about a foot long, and I will put a hook in it because I've had them hit it. And if it's not if it's not a material piece of bait, you can use fishing lures for alligators. So I've had them hit that, but a lot of times using that top splash combined with the smell and the bait being out there on the water, it will pull gators out of cover to at least take a look at it.
Yeah.
At that point, you're in a waiting game. You need to be as quiet as possible, as still as possible, and just wait him out. Be patient and let him come. And once he gets a bait, it's like you've got a bait there. You've got to let him swallow it because there's no hook to set in him. So you got to give him time to not only get it in his mouth, but get it down into his gullet to where he's not going to let it go. And that requires a really long leader on those lines.
Mm-hmm.
You want about a 4 or 5 foot leader because a really big gator, you've got 2 foot of mouth to go through.
Yep.
So it's got to get back through that gullet and into his throat. Once he's got it there and you've got him on a rod, you got to be really careful not to pull too hard because there's nothing keeping that in there except his mouth being closed and him pulling against it at a hard angle. If you pull too hard, you will get smacked in the chest with a big rotting piece of meat as you get close to the boat. And I've had that happen on a number of occasions with guys, telling them, don't horse him, just get him close enough, let us work closer to him with the boat until we can get a spear point in him.
Yep.
And that's the key. When you're bait hunting, you still need to have your spear points. And you need to have fishing rods rigged up because if you can get him close enough to the boat that you can get a hook in him, always get a hook in him.
Yeah. So what's your I imagine you don't usually set out on a trip just bait hunting right away. What's your favorite way to hunt?
I seldom bait hunt. The only time I bait hunt is when we're in high pressure areas where the gators just don't want to get close to the boat.
Yeah.
My favorite way to hunt is I like to hunt first thing in the morning, about an hour before sunrise, get out, sit in the middle of an open area that I know gators are, cruising, and watch for that big one. And if you can watch him in that half light in the morning, you can see him on top of the water. You can inch your way close enough to him to get a line over him. 50, 60 yards away, you can cast that far, you can get into a big gator. Out in the open, it's easy to get on them, and it's easy to fight them. and you don't have to worry too much about, losing hook sets. And then you can let the boat do the work. Let him pull the boat and maneuver the boat closer until you can get a spear into him and get him up and handled. I prefer to do that method. If I can't do that method and I've got to bubble trail them, then I like being in the flats boat because I've got a steering wheel control instead of a tiller control. I can throttle up and down. I can run at him really fast and stay right on his butt. And the thing about a gator is, they can hold their breath for about an hour if they're sitting still. But on some of these areas, like a perfect lake for this method is Lake Hancock in Polk County. It's got a real heavy muck layer. It's hell on equipment because the muck will get up into your engine. So you need a low water pickup and you need to be able to flush that engine out and keep something that you can, thread back into the little spitter on your outboard to make sure that you're always pumping fresh water through it, because if not, you'll blow an engine. But if you can get a gator that you can see and get on him, he'll go down and he'll start creeping. And if you can stay right on top of him to where guys can get your lines in him, he will run like hell. And if he's running like hell and you're right on top of that bubble trail, casting lines in front of it, trying to get into him, he's going to have to surface more often the longer you're chasing him. And eventually he's either going to mess up and you're going to get a hook in him or a spear in him or a dart or whatever you're throwing at him. And, if you can get to him before he gets to the East Marsh and that barricade over there, you're going to have a nice gator on your line. So, I mean, that's my running and gunning feature. There are certain lakes that are real shallow that have a lot of heavy cover, in which case we use airboat, and then you're harpooning them. But like I tell most of my guys, we're not built for throwing spears. We want to push that spear into them as hard as we can, jab it. Mm-hmm. So I tell my guys not to let go until they've made contact with them. But then don't try and stick it in them, try and stick it through them. But again, it's a difficult dance to do. You've got to know how to handle your airboat. You've got to know how to distribute your weight, because one guy going the wrong direction at the wrong time can swamp an airboat real quick.
Yeah. Not how you want to spend your night if you're out gator hunting.
No, and that leads me to another story. I have a really good friend named Mike who went in partners with me on the first airboat I ever owned. And we were over on Lake Hatchnahaw, fishing, one of the side canals up there. And we were cruising at probably about 20 miles an hour or so. And we saw this big gator up on the bank, just sitting up underneath the willows, laying on a bank. And we both hit it with the spotlights with our headlamps at the same time. And I said, hold on, Mike, I'm going to spin around and we'll go after this gator. Well, Mike is 340 pounds and 6'2". And he's sitting on the hopper seat in front of the boat. And as I go to spin around, Mike stood up and moved to one side like he was going to try and spear this gator before we were even close enough to do it. And as that happened, the whole side of the boat dipped under the water. Thankfully, we were in a narrow canal, and I was able to run it up on the dock on the bank, because if we had been out in the open water, we'd have been on the bottom of the lake in no time.
Yeah,
I've got twin 1,500 gallon per hour bilge pumps on my boat, and it took 20 minutes to clear all the water out of the boat. Yeah, it's something. I told him, I said, don't stand up again until I tell you to stand up. Ever. Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it, and you got to know how to handle your equipment, and know how to handle your people, and safety has always got to be number one on your list.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever seen that show. I'm sure you have, Dirty Jobs, but I know they were out marking gator nests or something, and they flipped one of their airboats. And I'm sure they got safety people all over there.
Oh, so. Yeah. There's two types of airboat owners: those guys who have sunk a boat, and those guys who are going to sink a boat.
Yeah,
it happens. I've done it one time. And I'm very, very, very careful about what I do.
Yeah.
But anybody who's ever owned an airboat will get water up over it, and eventually you're going to put one on the bottom. And the only way to get them out is to hook up more boats to it and drag it and get it up to, up on the surface to where you can start draining water out of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fun. Okay. Let's change gears a little bit and get into a little bit of fall hunting.
Sure.
The first thing I want to talk about, it's kind of like a careful dance I'm trying to have here, because I want to make sure this episode is valuable to everybody who's listening. But at the same time, I know we have some specific Florida knowledge here. So the one thing I want to touch on, because right now it's the open application period. So this is the first draw. Anybody can do it. I think it's until June 15th. So
correct.
A little bit of time left. And I'm going to get this episode out pretty quick. The only thing I'll say before we get into this is, if you live in Florida, I would definitely be applying for some of these public land hunts, even if you have some of your own property, or let's say you have a lease in Georgia or somewhere else nearby. I think there's a lot of opportunity here that you may be missing out on. And if you have other good hunting opportunities, you could just kind of go for the premium ones, which probably isn't going to make some of the people that solely hunt public happy. But I think the more people you have involved in public land and applying and that kind of stuff, it's better. I know there's federal dollars involved, and I think the more people that take interest in public land, the better. So I just want to encourage anybody that if you're scared of public land or that kind of thing, there's some really good opportunities out there. So
there's a lot of good quality public land hunting in Florida.
With that being said, what advice would you give to somebody that's applying to hunt here in Florida as far as the quota hunt system? Because I know the first year I applied, I made a mistake that probably everybody makes the first time, and that was applying for hunts that aren't going to get drawn by everybody. So if you could just share a little bit of advice with that.
Well, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to get out in the woods and hunt somewhere, then you can apply for areas that have a lot of permits that you got a high probability of drawing on. If your goal is to augment your private land hunting with some good quality hunts, then you're going to want to apply for areas that don't have a lot of permits, that are high quality areas that may take you several years to actually draw that permit, but you're going to accrue your preference points until you get what you want. Right. And about 58% of the hunters in the state of Florida hunt private land and public land together. So there's, more than half of the hunters who are applying have that luxury of being able to amass their preference points and wait out the area that they really and truly want to hunt. But if you're just, a broke hunter who's got no ability to hunt private land and you're relying on the public land system, then my biggest probably tip that I would give anybody is hunt close to home. Apply for areas that are close enough to you that you can spend time on the ground searching out quality areas to hunt that are away from crowds, that give you an opportunity to learn the area and learn how those animals utilize it. Because the more time you spend in the woods learning a specific area, the better chances you are going to have of harvesting a deer and being successful. And the biggest problem I see with a lot of these guys is they hear, I hear this place is great, and they draw a permit and they go and they have no clue how to hunt the place because they've only stepped foot on it once. Mm-hmm. If they're lucky, if they've even gone and scouted it, the week before or whatever. So they're going in blind. They don't really know what they're doing, and they spend the majority of their hunt searching for a place to hunt rather than actually hunting. And it's hard to be successful when you're not prepared for success. You haven't done anything to make yourself successful. So hunt close to home, apply for those areas that you can get to and scout on a regular basis, because even if they're hard to draw, you will, once you do draw them, you will be set up for success a lot better than if you're, traveling across the state to some area that you've never been to. I hear Joe Bud is great. Well, Joe Bud is great, but Joe Bud's in the Panhandle, and if you live in West Palm Beach, you got a 6-hour drive to get to Joe Bud. You're not going to be going up there every weekend to go scout it, So you've got to pick and choose the places that you want to apply for that give you an opportunity to be prepared for success.
Yep.
So that's what I tell most of my guys is that, if you're going to apply for something you've never been, apply for some place that you can scout regularly and be close to. If you have the luxury of picking and choosing where you want to go because you've got other places, then you can, venture further out and concentrate on those areas that have low quota permit numbers and high harvest rates. And then you've got time while you're accruing your permit preference points to do some scouting and learn the areas over a longer period of time. So those are your two basic strategies for doing this. And the other thing is that if you aren't successful, play the weekly lottery and the redraws, because there's plenty of permits available for redraw every week. And there's some really good quality areas, and they don't cost you any preference points. So if you get one of those, you can spend some time learning a new area. It doesn't hurt to pick something up that you've never been to before. Although I will tell guys that, if you don't know it, if it's far away from home and you may or may not have a chance of using it, don't put in for it.
Yeah, don't waste it.
Don't waste it, because if you get drawn for it, then decide not to go, it's a permit that's gone and an opportunity that's been taken away from somebody else who would have used it and may have been successful. So stick to what you know, and do what you can to make yourself a better hunter.
Yeah, I like that. The only thing I'll add on to that is if the area that's close to home for you has, say, 1,000 permits, then just pick that up in one of the later phases and start collecting some preference points. So
exactly, because
4 or 5
they're
years down
there.
the road, then you can go to that far away hunt that is tougher to get.
Yeah, for me, I live here in Tampa, so Green Swamp has got a lot of permits,
right?
And there's always permits available.
And my first year I applied, I got a general gun Green Swamp permit because that's what I put in for, it being close to home. But then I find out I could just picked one up in phase 2 and picked up a preference point that could have used down the road. So
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's enough in the weeds for Chuck, if somebody's got a question for you, like with this, permit draw stuff, feel free to reach out to me. Chuck knows about it more than I do. So how can somebody get a hold of you?
They can call me directly. Yeah, you can call me directly on my cell phone at 813-918-7610, or you can email me at huntmaster01. It's HUNTMSTR01 at gmail.com. Or you can get a hold of me on Facebook or on Florida Hunters Network on Facebook. I'm one of the moderators there. And actually, I've got a sticky post on Florida Hunters Network that has all of the new rules for the upcoming deer season, with the annual bag limits explained in detail and the harvest reporting system explained in detail. So that harvest reporting system should be up by the end of the summer. Right now it's going through beta testing. What we've had to do is, rather than write an entirely new program, FWC is using an existing program that they used for turtle nest reporting, and we're kind of retrofitting it for our purposes for harvest reporting for deer. And it looks like it's going to work pretty well. There's also going to be a telephone line, and that will be available, but it's not going to be a 24-hour a day available telephone call in, because it has to be monitored by an operator. So we're still looking at what the times are going to be on that and when that's going to be available. But there will be a telephonic report for those who don't have a smartphone or those who don't have internet service.
Man, I hope that's something they get right, because I know that was an issue in Alabama. And
there's always going to be some growing
backlash.
Pains. There's always going to be some growing pains. And we know that there's not going to be 100% compliance ever, because no state has 100% compliance. But we want hunters to feel comfortable using it, and we want people to be as honest as they, as possible when reporting, because it's only going to help you if you're honest. If you're dishonest in what you're killing and not reporting it completely, it can hurt you in the long run. If we're seeing that harvest numbers are going down, and it's because people aren't using the system the way it's supposed to be, it could limit harvest later. If they're over-reporting and saying stuff that there's is not there, which I don't anticipate, that could also hurt, because they could end up over-harvesting in the future.
Okay, so let's get into some tactics here. One thing you just mentioned, if you're a new hunter, is you want to find somewhere close to home. We can spend a lot of time there. What is it that you're looking for when you? It's probably been a while since you've been on a new piece of property here in Florida, but if you're on a new piece of property, what is it that you're keying on scouting? Let's start like right now. Let's say it's summer, so it's not right after season, but there's a couple months. Maybe you draw a new area and you're going to have a couple months before you hunt it. How do you start out looking at that piece of property?
Well, the first thing I always do is I look at my aerials. I look at aerial maps, and I look at the terrain and what my trees are, my tree cover is looking like. Because what I want to find, I'm thinking about the fall and how bucks move through an area in the fall. So I want to identify a bedding area. I want to identify food sources, and I want to identify transition spots between those food sources and bedding areas that bucks are going to be forced to move through. Pinch points, saddles, small strips of woods that offer good cover from one location to the next that's going to put that deer in my lap. All right. So once I identify that, and it takes some time learning how to read aerial maps and learning how to decide what trees are what and what elevation changes are where. Depending on where you are in the state, you may not have to worry about elevation change. It's something that's very subtle in most of the state, and you won't notice it until you're actually on the ground. But certain trees grow in certain types of terrain, and as you learn to read aerial maps, you can pretty much figure out where your high and low ground is by the trees that are growing on it. So that's the first thing I look for, is those transition areas. And then once I get on the ground and start looking, I'm looking for areas that have mass trees that are going to be producing. So I'm taking my binoculars and looking to see, are there acorns in this tree? Are they starting to grow? Are there any persimmons in the area? Do they have fruit on them? Are they going to be dropping during archery season? What food sources are on the ground? What are they hitting right now? During the summer, they're eating mostly soft foods like green vegetation. They're eating briars. They're eating palmetto berries. They're eating pretty much anything they can get their mouths on, because it's easier to list what they won't eat than what they will eat.
Yeah.
Because deer eat pretty much everything. And look at what they're eating the most of. How much honeysuckle is in the area? How much Indian hawthorn? How many gallberries are there? American beautyberry, things that they really like, that's kind of like deer candy for them. And once I find those food sources and I find those bedding areas and those transition areas, then I'm looking for primary travel corridors and secondary travel corridors that parallel the primaries, because the does and the young deer will use the primaries, but the bigger bucks are going to use those secondary travel areas, the dimmer trails that parallel the major trails, especially mature bucks. They don't like to come out of cover. So I want to get high and tight and be able to see down into these areas so I've got clean shots from above, but also be high enough that my movement is kind of masked and my scent gets carried away from the area without being blown down onto the travel path. And I want to look at points of ingress and egress. How am I going to get in there without busting them out of their bedding area? There's a lot that goes into it. One of the guys that's best at it really is LC Hunter, Vince, Venuti,
Thomas.
Mr. Thomas Venuti.
Yeah.
Thomas knows how to find big deer, especially on public land. He's really good at it. And I mean, there's been some deer that he and his wife have gone after in areas that they hadn't hunted before that I had, and we talked about it. And I said, look, I know there's this buck here. I know I'm not going to get drawn for it. You got a permit. Here's where I would concentrate. And I give him the start off, and he goes and finishes it. And they've killed some real nice deer in those areas on places I knew I was never going to get a permit for.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. You got to do your homework, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But those transition areas are key. And the biggest transition areas that I like to look at is, where do different terrains meet? For me, hunting the edges of 3 different types of terrain where it converges is usually the best. So if you've got an oak woods, an oak flat, where it meets a pine thicket, where it meets a little open area or a palmetto edge, you've got those 3 different types of terrain converging in one location. Those are key staging areas for deer.
So if you've got a 3-day hunt,
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, do you use trail cameras at all ahead of time? If you're hunting in areas, do you typically use trail cameras?
In some places, I use trail cameras. There are certain places that I will use trail cameras because I know that there's quality deer in those areas, and that's what I'm going after.
Mm-hmm.
In other areas that I'm just going to harvest illegal deer, I don't particularly mess with putting up trail cameras.
Yeah,
I just go in there and hunt for the joy of hunting.
So some of it's not even so much patterning, but just wanting to know what's in the area. What you're going after.
For instance, there is one particular WMA in this state that anybody who knows me really well knows which I'm talking about, but I won't name it.
Okay.
It's my favorite piece of woods in the whole state, and I'm fortunate enough to draw it regularly, and I know it intimately. There's not an inch of that ground in that entire WMA I don't know, and I know the deer that are in it. And I know that they're using certain areas. So I will set trail cameras in there, first of all, to make sure that the bucks that I'm after are still using that particular area. And secondly, to identify which portions of that property they are frequenting the most. That's what I'm using my trail cameras for there. Other places, I have set trail cameras just to see if there's, deer that I want to kill in the area.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if that's the case, I'm not really spending that much time worrying about them. I'm looking for high sign concentration, and I do most of my public land hunting during archery season. And my gun season, I'm on a club most of the time,
mm-hmm.
So I don't spend too much time worrying about public land hunting during gun season. Although I do a few of them, but for the most part, it's archery and muzzleloader that I'm concentrating on, and that's most of the areas I hunt. That's when the rut is.
Right.
So that's why I'm concentrating my camera focus on those areas at that time of year.
Okay, so here's kind of somewhere that I personally am struggling with in trying to figure out what the best strategy is, because I've talked to some different people that have had a lot of success that kind of do what I find to be counterintuitive, and that's. I think a lot of people end up finding success hunting the same stand for a full weekend. So you'll find a good area, and some of these guys will just sit and wait it out, or they'll go to the same spot year after year. And I think a lot of this is tied to rut activity. So maybe you're just cruising a deer that might have been 2 miles away the day before. Whereas me, I hate to hunt the same stand even more than one sit. If I'm sitting all day, that's fine, but once I've gone in and out of an area, I kind of feel like I've blown it up. And it seems like there's a lot of guys having success that are willing to stick it out in one spot. What's your feeling on that?
Well, again, it depends on your style of hunting. And for me, the WMA I was talking about just a minute ago that I'm fortunate enough to draw, that I know every inch of. I've got probably a dozen different stand locations that I will hunt in that area, depending on what the deer are doing and where they're going during any given hunt in that place.
Mm-hmm.
If the rut is on and it's on heavy, there is one general area within that WMA that I will hunt religiously, day in, day out, will not leave it. And I've got a high rate of success in there because it's the spot those deer want to be in. Regardless of who comes through there, those deer are going to be in that spot. They may not get close enough for a shot, but I'm going to see them. And if I can see them, I've got a chance of calling to them or getting them to come close enough for me to get a shot at them. So, when the rut is on, I will definitely hunt the same spot over and over and over again. When it's really warm and the rut isn't on, it's pre-rut, or it's post-rut, I may move from one stand location to the next, morning, afternoon, day after day, and never hunt the same place twice.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it has to do with the amount of pressure that's in an area, how much scent I'm laying down personally, and the amount of effort I need to get to put into it to get to that spot. I may not want to walk 1.25 miles into one spot in the morning and then walk another 1.5 miles on another spot in the afternoon. So it may just be a matter of okay, I'm going to hunt this general area because there's a lot of deer in it. Maybe this one particular stand location I hunt in the morning, and then I move 200 yards or 300 yards over to another spot in the afternoon so that my scent's not in the same place. I'm distributing it over a broader area. And truth be told, the first time that you hunt a stand is going to be your most successful time because there's no scent in there. You haven't alerted the animals to your presence, and they're going to be completely unaware that anybody's in that particular location. So, I mean, both can be very successful, but it's when you use those tactics, when you stick it out and sit all day and hunt the same spot day after day for 3 or 4 days, as opposed to when you need to get up and move around. And for me, I found that as the closer you get to the rut, the more opportunity you have to sit in one location.
Yeah.
And the further away you get from it, the more you need to be mobile and adaptive to what the deer are doing.
Yeah, and I guess maybe an exception to that might be if you're on like a really hot food source, like a really good persimmon tree or something like that. Maybe that one's where what you said, they want to be there type deal. Yeah,
but that hot food source, again, here in Florida, those hot food sources exist all over the place. And big bucks, that's what you're going after, is a mature deer. He's not going to hit that hot food source the same way the does are. Does and the young deer will come to a food source until it's gone, over and over and over again. But a big buck, first of all, he's not going to come charging in there most of the time. Most of the time, he's going to sit back. He's going to let everybody else get up to it. And then he's going to wander in at last light or just before first light and be out of there. And he's going to go lay down. He's going to conserve his energy. So, those hot food sources can be great places, but they also need to be isolated hot food sources. And what I have found is that there are hot food sources for all deer and hot food sources for just bucks. Because remember, a buck needs something different than a doe does during different times of the year. As you approach the rut, does are going to be keying on higher protein sources that also have, plenty of soft mass and high water concentrations, because they're going to be lactating. They're going to be producing babies. So they're going to want to eat something different than what a buck's going to eat. Bucks are going to be concentrating on acorns. And they're going to like specific acorns from specific trees because they're sweeter and they're higher in fat content than, just eating any acorn that's on the ground.
Yep. So let's say, obviously in the north end of state, there's, you got a lot of like swamp chestnuts and actual white oaks, but I know further south, it's tougher to find those type of trees. What type of trees do you find deer focusing on if those two types of acorn trees are not available?
Yeah, well, live oaks in most of central and south Florida are better than, say, pin oaks or water oaks. Overcup oaks are also good if you can find them. Some of the turkey oaks, if you can find a turkey oak that's producing acorns, deer will hit those. And every acorn tree, every oak tree is going to drop at different times of the year. The pin oaks rain early. The live oaks tend to be a little bit later than them. The overcups are usually late fall. So you have to know when they're falling. And for me, the swamp chestnuts, deer don't really like them. They're too hard for them to break open. The hogs will eat them, but the swamp chestnut's hard for a deer to break open. So during the archery season, I'm looking at finding that persimmons tree, finding that one oak tree that's raining a lot of acorns, finding any palmetto berries I can still find, and the American beautyberry. If there's any American beautyberry still on the ground that hasn't been eaten by everything, they love those things. And those are a really bright green plant that have those purple berries all over them in clusters.
Mm-hmm.
That purplish red berry, those things, the deer they're like candy for them. They'll eat the heck out of them. If you can find some honey locust in the early part of the season is great too. And those look at those big long black bean pods.
Mm-hmm.
So when they split and fall open, the beans inside of them, the deer just tear them up. those are all good quality key food sources early in the year. When it comes to oak trees, the further north I get, if I could find a white oak, and you'll find white oaks from about Hillsborough and Pasco County north. I haven't found too many white oaks on the east side of the state until I've gotten up, north of Ocala.
Mm-hmm.
But from Ocala north, and as you're going further west down towards Hillsborough and Pasco County and northern Polk County, you can find white oaks. And white oaks are always going to be the best. I mean, they're huge, they're sweeter than all the rest of them, and they're very few and far between. So when you find one that's dropping, get out there and put some fertilizer on it and mark it, know where it's at, fertilize it every year, and it's going to pay off for you in the long run. What do you pay attention to as far as buck sign when you're scouting? I'm looking for rub lines. I'm looking for not so much scrapes, because if I can find scrapes and find a concentration of scrapes, then I know I'm in somebody's bedroom. But I'm looking for rub lines first and foremost, because rub lines delineate which travel corridors those bucks are using and where they're comfortable. And it's usually pretty close to tight cover. There's certain different types of plants I look for also. When I'm going through a bottom and I start finding cane, maiden cane, or brushy cane, that's an area I like to really concentrate looking on for more sign, because there's something about that maiden cane that the deer like being in it. They can see out of it, they can move through it quietly, and big bucks just tend to gravitate towards those areas. I'm not familiar with that. Does that just kind of look like bamboo thickets? Yeah, it looks like a bamboo thicket, but it's not as thick. It's usually smaller. It almost looks like young bamboo. Yeah, I've seen it, just never knew what it was. Okay. Yeah, it's called maiden cane. The other thing I look for is cedar trees. If I can find cedar trees, usually I'm going to find rubs. Mm-hmm. Deer just love the way the cedar smells. They love the way that the bark, gives when they're pushing against it. It's one of those things that, they're concentrating on when they're sparring with trees. Cedars are one of their favorites. Mm-hmm. Cedars and small magnolias and small willows, they'll tear them up. Yeah. The other thing is, when I'm looking at my rubs, I want to look at the size of the rub, the elevation of the rub off the ground, and are they actually hooking those branches and tearing them apart, or are they just rubbing against it? A small rub could be a small buck, could be a big buck, but a small tree that's been uprooted or snapped in half is going to be a bigger buck. He's got some main beam to him. He's hooking around that thing and snapping it off with his head. Mm-hmm. So even a small rub can give you indication of what the buck size is, depending on where it's broken and if it's broken and how much destruction there is, and looking at the ground around it. If you can find tracks, you can find a big track. How deep is that track into the ground? How soft is the ground? What kind of weights he got on him? What kind of sizes is he carrying? And that's stuff that you can look at and then go, okay, now here's a place I need to put a camera. Yep. I've got this sign here. This is interesting. Now it's time to see what's actually making this sign. So summertime's great for all that stuff. Can you describe a place? Let's say you're scouting a new area. You've checked out the aerials, and let's say you got 10 places that you kind of want to hit before the season walking through. Mm-hmm. Could you maybe describe an area that, like, when you walk to it and you see it before the season starts, you're like, okay, I need to get out of here. I'm going to come back and sit in this area, first thing, because I know this is the spot. Could you describe maybe some of the elements that spot might have? Yeah, I guess. Maybe I can tell it to you this way, because this was something that happened to me about 4 or 5 years ago. I had never been to Little Big Econ before. Okay. I'd heard that it was fantastic. I knew people who'd hunted it. So I was lucky enough to draw a Thanksgiving weekend hunt at Little Big Econ, and had not had time to scout it at all. But I went in based on aerial maps. Okay, so I looked at the whole area with the aerial maps and identified that I wanted to hunt off the south end of the walk-in area, and I wanted to try working my way towards the river. And I found several different places on the aerials that I thought would be good. So I went in really early in the dark with my map on my phone marked with these possible stand locations. And the first one that I came to was one of the first fields. There was some transition between one size of tree to the next, and I could tell there was a lot of cabbage palms and oak trees there. And there was what looked like a dim logging road coming off of one of the cut-throughs off the fields. So as I'm walking towards it, the first thing I see is that the trees are what I thought they were, but they're nowhere near as big as I thought they were. No place I could get a stand in there unless I was hunting out of one of the cabbage palms, and the canopy was too low to be able to get up and hunt comfortably. So I abandoned that immediately and kept walking past it to the next spot. So as I'm getting to the next spot, I realized that it's very monotonous. It looks good from the aerial coverage, but once you get on the ground, there's no discerning features. It's just wide open swamp bottom with no definition to it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of sign there. Okay? There's an old logging road that cuts through, but there's not a lot of sign there. So I keep walking past that. The next spot I get to is there is a little marsh that you can actually see from the air on the south side. And on the north side, there is a spring. And in between those two, it goes from cabbage palms to what looks like big oak trees. So I start walking to this spot, which is about 400 yards off of the main trail back in the woods. It's probably a mile and a half from where I park my truck. All right. And it's getting close to daylight. But as soon as I get in there and I hit these bigger trees, they are big oak trees. And I start seeing scrapes. I'm like, this is going to be my spot. There's big cabbage palms, but they're not fully grown. They're just on the ground. They're not full trees.
Mm-hmm.
And the saddle that is between the marsh on the south and the spring on the north, that little land bridge in between them is not but about 70 yards across and maybe about 100 yards wide. So I'm like, okay, the wind is out of the north. This area has got a lot of sign in it. I'm going to face north on the south edge of this land saddle, right up against that seep on the south end of that little marsh, and I can cover this whole area with my rifle. So I find a tree that looks good, that's about dead center, and I climb up about 15 feet, which is about as high as I can get before the canopy starts getting too thick. I turn around and face north, and it starts breaking daylight. Pull out a grunt tube and a bleat call, and I go through a little, tending sequence. And as soon as I do that, this buck stands up from underneath a cabbage palm at maybe 80 yards to my left. And gets behind an oak tree, and I could see immediately that it was a really big deer. Big-bodied, dark antlers, a lot of bone on his head, and he gets behind this tree. So I throw my rifle up, and I wait for him to clear. And as soon as he takes a step out, I can see he's one I want to shoot. I don't really care about how many points he is. I quit concentrating on antlers, and I settle that crosshair behind his shoulder and put him down. I wasn't in the stand 15 minutes. And this deer was right there. And, I mean, it ended up being a 4.5-year-old 8-point with that scored 103 inches.
All right.
And it was one of those areas. I've since been back and have killed 2 more deer out of the same area because that particular location, even though there's nothing else around it that really makes it great, it's those particular trees right there that are dropping acorns and the cover around it and the fact that those deer have to move through there if they want to utilize those trees and that food source. It's going to be a good spot year after year after year.
Man, yeah, that was actually really, really helpful scenario. Interesting story. I'm sure some people are going to be looking up aerials trying to figure out where your spot is.
There's lots of places like that in there.
Well, that's pretty cool. All right. So if do you have any final tips for just basically public land hunting in general? Something Is there anything maybe you've changed your ideas or tactics on, learned in the last 5 years?
Yeah. Number one is don't go past deer to get to other deer. Most guys think they need to get the furthest away from the road, the furthest away from the truck, the furthest away from everybody else. It's not necessary. There's plenty of big deer that get killed within 100 yards of the road every year. I'm not talking about major thoroughfares, but if the habitat is right and the food sources are there and the cover is there, the animals will be there. So if you're seeing sign, but it's only 100 yards from where you parked your truck, don't dismiss it because it's 100 yards from where you parked your truck. I've killed plenty of deer within eyesight of my vehicle. And it's because I didn't dismiss the area just because it was close.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to get away from everybody, but remember, the work starts after the trigger gets pulled. And the further you are away, the more work it's going to be.
I was on a public hunt last year during a rifle hunt, and there was a guy that shot. It was at least in the 130s. It might have been 140, and he was probably 150 yards from the road. Maybe he might have been. The deer might have been 150 yards from the road. He might have been less than 100.
Yeah.
It was. I had that thing on trail camera as a monster. And that is one of those that you go to the right areas, you might just get lucky because it's not like he had any idea that would do. He just picked a tree and got lucky, but good for him.
Some days it's your day.
Yeah.
Some days it's just your day.
I'm waiting on that day.
Yeah, it'll happen, man.
But that's why we keep going.
That's it. Yeah, and for those of us who love to hunt, it's not about. I mean, yeah, we like to kill big deer and we want to see big deer and we like that and that growth and that size and everything else. But man, if any day I get to spend sitting in a tree, enjoying the weather and the nature and just being with my own thoughts, it's a win for me, man. I don't have to see anything. It's nice. I don't have to shoot anything. It's a bonus. But I hunt because I love to hunt. And there's a visceral connection between me and the land. It's personal. That's my church. That's my spirituality. That's where I do my thinking and my talking to God and my getting in touch with who I am and my centering. And so even if there wasn't a real good chance of killing something, I'm going to climb that tree every weekend, every chance I get. And just, being lucky is great, but I'd much rather be out there just enjoying myself and letting the luck come to me. If it's my day, it's my day.
All right, this is going to be a horrible transition, but I got to circle back and ask this because that would be a great way to end, but I got a couple questions to ask you.
Sure.
One, you mentioned your setup. What is your public land setup? You mentioned going in blind. You're carrying your stand on your back. What's your setup for that?
Okay, well, I carry more crap than most people do because that's the way I hunt. But I use Summit Climber, a Viper XS or SS. I've got the foot loops on it. I've got little zipper ditty bags on each side that I carry. My pull-up rope. I've got a thermocell that's already clamped onto the railing, so I don't have to worry about digging out one and finding one. On top of the climber, I put my backpack. I strap it down with a bungee cord over top of the shoulder straps and then put my waist belt that's part of the backpack around the center of the stand so it doesn't bounce around on me. And that's what I walk in with. In my backpack, I've got grunt tube, bleak can, usually 1 or 2 Gatorades. If I'm going to be sitting all day, I keep a sandwich in there and a couple of snacks, usually granolas or trail mix or something like that, and a piece of fruit or two. I've always got a headlamp, an extra headlamp, a roll of toilet paper for obvious reasons and also for blood trailing because nothing's better than white TP to mark your blood spots. I've got a pair of pliers, multi-tool pliers. My binocs are always on my chest. Rangefinder. I keep a bottle of scent spray with me. I keep another misting bottle with doe estrus in it. I've got usually a couple of different hanging hooks. And if I'm bow hunting, I've got my bow caddy up there that I can screw into the tree. My safety harness is always in there. I put it on before I get up into the tree. And I climb with it on, and I wear it until I get down. I've got an extra rope. I've got one of those little retriever hooks. It's
for your glove?
Oh, not just for glove. This thing will pick up anything. It's basically a squid rig.
Yep.
But it's called the silent retriever. It's basically two squid hooks that are joined together, and I put those on a small rope, and I keep it in its little container so it doesn't hook on everything. But it'll pick up arrows.
Yeah.
I mean, you drop an arrow out of a tree, you put this thing on it, it'll slide up. If it doesn't hook into the carbon, it'll hook into the fletching and pull it right up for you, or the broadhead or whatever. It'll pick up thermocells. It'll pick up anything you drop. It'll pick it up. So I keep that with me. And, I mean, but if I didn't hunt with anything else, I would carry at least the bleat can, the grunt tube, and the binocs. Those are the most important things to have on me other than my safety harness.
And do you use those the full season?
Yes. Yes. In Florida, bleat can and grunt tube, because a multi-vocal grunt tube. I prefer something like the Ridge Runner from Quaker Boy, because it doesn't take a whole lot of air. It'll never stick. The reeds will never stick. And you can adjust it from a distressed fawn bleat all the way to a tending buck grunt. It doesn't get real loud. And you can even do that clicking tending grunt with it. But it's small, it's compact, and it's just got a great sound to it. That one or the original Primos hardwood grunter, those are both good grunt tubes. And then I use the mini can. I don't like the big can. I don't like the medium-sized can. I like the mini one. It's short, it's high-pitched, and it really sounds like a doe just doing a small estrus bleat. I find that the bigger bleat cans are too long and too loud.
Yeah.
So the mini ones work great. And personally, for me, I don't use a deep tending grunt. I put it on a yearling buck grunt, and that's what I do all my grunting with. Because our deer here are not the same size as they are up north. They don't get as deep a sound.
That's a good point.
So sounding soft and making, I usually call about every 20 to 30 minutes blind, whether I see something or not. I'll make a small, grunt tending sequence. And I can't tell you how many times I've had deer come running into an area from doing that.
All right. Well, that's really good. Okay. Last thing. Do you have any updates since we last talked on the bear hunt? Have there been any more discussions or furthering along come of that bear hunting in Florida? Okay.
Well, here's where we are kind of with the bear hunt. Right now, the climate politically is wrong for the bear hunt. We have commissioners on the commission dais that probably will not be amenable to reinstating a hunt at this time. And pushing for it will only possibly cause us to lose it forever. So we're biding our time. We're allowing FWC's biologists to continue doing their study and their monitoring. We've had a couple of studies that are almost completed, but right now the data is telling us that our bear population is growing exponentially. Our cub recruitment is through the roof at like higher than 90%. Every sow is having at least 2 cubs or more. I think our cub rate is at 2.25 right now. So 2 1/4 cubs per sow is outstanding.
Yeah.
And like I said, the recruitment rate's at higher than 90%. The study that we have going on right now in the East Panhandle, we've lost 4 cubs over the course of the last 2 years. and 2 of those were to malnutrition, and the other 2 were to interspecies aggression. So they were killed by bigger males, so that the sow would be able to breed again. That's it. The rest of them, they're all healthy. They're all getting ready to be fully recruited into the herd. We've got incident rates are going back up, especially in areas like the Ocala region, East Panhandle region, and Northeast Florida. So the interaction rates are going back up again. They're almost at what they were prior to the hunt. In a few areas, they've exceeded where they were prior to the hunt in 2015. So it's getting close to where we need to be looking at opening it back up again, but we have to bide our time. Because if we push too hard, what's going to happen is they're going to push for legislation to take it out of our hands, and we could lose it forever. And we don't need that.
So, I mean, I don't mean to sound insensitive or anything like this when I'm saying this, but it sounds like you're kind of talking about it's very much incidents related, and at some point there's going to be a boiling over point with too many bears and too many incidents. And
it's not that it's incidents related. It's, as Dr. Eason described it back in 2015 before the hunt, there are 2 capacities. There's the natural carrying capacity of the land, and then there is the public's perception capacity. Okay, what they are willing to put up with.
Mm-hmm.
All right, how many bears are we willing to put up with before we say, okay, it's a necessity to have a hunt to control populations? For some people, we've exceeded that. For others, we'll never get there.
Yep.
And so we have to find a way to get the public educated as to why it's necessary to have a controlled hunt on a regular basis, and how beneficial hunting bears can be for the population and their continued proliferance.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like no matter what, there's going to be a lot more bears next time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more bears already.
Yeah,
I mean, our population. We finished that last population count a couple of years ago, and they came out with an estimate of 4,050 breeding age bears. That means bears over the age of 2 that can have cubs.
Yep.
Okay. That doesn't count the cubs. If you're counting cubs in there, and bears that are under 2 years of age, you're looking at a population of approaching 6,000 to 6,500.
And that's a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the population is strong. We still have the same number of bears being hit by cars every year. And we've got fewer bears that are being killed through illegal methods.
Yeah. Which I'm sure, unfortunately, that will go up as incidents go up. But
it will. And unfortunately, one of the other reasons why we can't really push for the bear hunt right now is because those morons that got busted last year. We had 9 people who were running illegal bear hunts with dogs. They were treeing bears, knocking them out of trees, letting the dogs maul them to death, and videotaping it and putting it on social media.
Yeah.
So that they were all being prosecuted. They will get penalized to one degree or another. Some more than others, because some did more than others.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a black eye. And unfortunately, even though we in the hunting community realize that they are poachers and not hunters, the rest of the world looks at them and says, oh, hunters did this. And so it gives us a black eye in the hunting community.
Yeah, it's really a shame. It should be a black eye in society in general, and really
it should be.
It gets pegged on hunters. But
of course it does. And so, when it happened, those of us in the lead, the hunting community, came out very strongly against what they did and denounced it and vilified them for the criminals that they were, or still are. But, unfortunately, public perception is what it is, and we have to live with that and wait until that wound isn't so fresh and it's healed over some before we can really start pushing for this hunt again. Yeah. And once we do, I mean, there's some fear there at FWC. I mean, I know they won't say that they're afraid, but they're afraid. The leadership at FWC is afraid. They're afraid that the commissioners will balk at it and possibly take it off the table forever. They're afraid that the anti-hunters will push for legislation that will make that will take it out of their hands. They're afraid that the anti-hunters will go out there and push for the commissioners to be voted in instead of appointed by the governor, which would be a fiasco for the state. And I don't disagree with them to some degree. And so it's better for us to bide our time and wait for things to be in our favor. And then once we get the hunt, make sure that that hunt is conducted properly and in a manner that will preclude any future problems like we had with the first one.
So when the time comes, we really, as a hunting community, need to get after it, not just Florida.
Yeah, even if you don't want to hunt bears, and you could care less about hunting bears, support the bear hunt. Because by supporting the bear hunt, you're supporting the continuation of lawful hunting in this state, which is under attack every day.
It's going to be a national issue when it
already is a national
comes
issue.
Up again. Yeah,
it already is a national issue. I mean, you look at what they've done to the bear hunters in Ontario. You look at what they're trying to do to the bear hunters out in Yellowstone. You know, with the grizzly hunts, with the polar bear hunts, and PETA and the U.S. Humane Society and these folks here in this state have made no bones about it. They are using Florida and California as testing grounds. If they can, and New Jersey, if they can close the hunting in those areas, they can close them anywhere.
Mm-hmm. All right, Chuck. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think we covered a lot of really good stuff, from gators, deer to bears. So I'm sure we got something for everybody. I really appreciate you making some time for me today.
Not a problem, brother. I love it. Anytime you want me on, just let me know. And maybe next time we'll do turkeys or we'll do waterfowl or something.
That sounds good to me.
All right, brother. Right.
Well,
thank you again so much.
We'll talk to you soon, and good luck this coming season.
All right, you too, bud. Take care.
All right, we're out down south.